It seems that when most people think of the circus, acts like lion taming and acrobatics come to mind. But what if I told you it wasn't always that way? Although the origin of the circus is a little bit debatable, you can thank one man for the idea of the modern circus. Lend me your ear for a while as I unravel the history behind the modern circus. It appears my audience has arrived. Anyway, while most know what a circus is, little know about the humble beginnings of such a place. And what better way to learn than a well-researched book? I said well-researched book.
Here's your book, Bielsa.
Okay, thanks. Our story begins with... What?
I was wondering, can I be in the episode, Bielsa?
Now then, our story begins with a man by the name of Philip Astley. January 8, 1742, a baby was born, and his name would be Philip Astley. Philip was born in a small market town named Newcastle-under-Lyme in England, born to Edward and Unc Astley. I couldn't find a picture of them, so His father was a cabinet maker, a job Philip would soon work in as an apprentice at the age of 9. However, Philip had a passion for horses, and would one day want to have a career where he could work with and admire them. Even though his father was quite a hot-tempered man, Philip would faithfully remain under his wing until the age of 17, where after a rather heated argument with his father, he would leave his home and join the military. Standing at 6 feet tall, Philip was quite the behemoth among his peers, but despite that, he would fit right in. It was here he would learn how to ride horses, and become an expert at that. So much so that he would gain the attention of Domenico Angelo, a talented man who was gifted in the field of fencing and horse riding. With his mastery of the sword, he would take Philip under his wing and teach him how to better use his sword in combat. In 1761, Philip would finally see action and fight in the 7 Years' War, where he was given the rank of corporal. After capturing an enemy in battle and saving the Duke of Brunswick, who had been within enemy territory, Philip would be promoted to the rank of Sergeant Major after proving himself in battle. On June 21, 1766, decorated and praised, he would eventually be discharged from the military and given a white horse, who went by the name of Gibraltar. Gibraltar? We'll name it Gibby. He was given Gibby as a parting gift. Philip returned to Lambeth, a borough in London where his family and he ended up moving before his venture to the military. Gibby would not be the only thing he returned with, as Philip would return with his soon-to-be wife, producing a son the following year. It was clear that Philip needed to find a way to help his growing family. Trick riding was quite popular in 18th century England, a form of entertainment once reserved for only the wealthy and had now become affordable to even commoners. Professions like horse riding instructors had now become more available to the public. Many veterans of war, who had amassed a wide array of skills when it came to horse riding, now resorted to these occupations so as to not let their talents go to waste. Many of the men Philip fought alongside with would take on these jobs, including a fellow former cavalry sergeant by the name of Balp, who owned a menage where Philip would temporarily decide to work for him. By 1768, Philip would acquire a piece of land where he would open a school with the objective to teach people how to ride horses. The school included an amphitheater, although the design of the school left much to be desired. Made from wood, the enclosure in which he rode horses did not even have a roof over its head, but it got the job done. Philip would spend his time teaching students in the morning, and by noon was a performer in his amphitheater, at least during the summertime, as cold temperatures were not exactly desirable to perform in. He would perform his tricks on his trusted horse Gibby, and add an additional horse to his performance. A small horse, might I add, that would basically do math relating to addition and subtraction, although it was merely trained to give answers to math problems, and likely didn't actually understand the equations it was calculating, perhaps reading the trainer or audience's reaction when it got up to the right number, and ceasing to count any higher once it realized the reaction from the audience. It wouldn't be the only horse to do so after all. It could also play dead, fire guns, and apparently read minds, although the validity of that last one might be questionable. But hey, I'll buy it. All his performances were done in a circular arena, although he did not start the trend of using a circular arena, as they were already common for trick riding. Philip was able to gather a faithful audience for his performances. However, something sinister loomed over his head. Something he was forgetting. What could it be? Oh, that's right, more money needed to be made. As I said before, trick riding was no longer reserved as entertainment for the wealthy and the nobility. If the wealthy wanted entertainment, they could afford to support an entire stadium's worth of entertainment. But without the aid of the rich, in order to support these performers and their faculties, they would have to garner a much larger audience of commoners to make enough money to support themselves. Philip couldn't be a one-trick pony, no pun intended. He had to keep up with the likes of other entertainers and diversify his performances in order to garner a much larger audience. Set on making the best establishment of entertainment known to man, Philip would try to figure out which types of performances people found the most appealing. What grabbed people's attention? Philip scoured London for the most successful theaters and took note of what people enjoyed the most. He found that people commonly took interest in visual acts such as juggling and acrobatics. With that knowledge in mind, Philip would add an addition to his cast of performers. A performer so versatile, so powerful that... Philip hadn't realized it yet, but by adding a clown to his cast of entertainers, he had already planted the seeds of what we would commonly think of when we see the word circus. Clowns were entertainers that were often part of a much bigger act in the Elizabethan theater. But by isolating the clown from its larger performance and making it its own thing, Philip created a genius idea that would become a great hit with the people of London. On top of that, he'd have other acts done by performers such as juggling and tumbling added to the show. The clown played between each of these segments. Philip had quite the success in his hands, but with every success that exists, there are others that also want a piece of that success. In 1772, a former equestrian of Philip's, named Charles Hudges, decided to open his own horse riding school that was basically a direct copy of Philip's own school. To add insult to injury, the school was located not too far away from Philip's own school, leading to even bigger competition. Strangely enough, this attracted even more interest towards both of their schools, leading to even more success on both sides. All this attention, however, was also a curse. Magistrates, who were basically judges, decided to close down both of their schools in 1773, due to the fact that neither of them had a formal license to perform. Charles would see this moment as an opportunity to take his performances overseas, all around Europe. Since Philip still owned the land his school was on, he would remain in London and secure a license in order to continue his shows. However, this would not be the last time we hear of Charles. Just a year later, in 1774, Philip would perform in Paris for the first time with his act known as Feats of Horsemanship. Apparently, he must have liked this venture because years later, he would make Paris his secondary home. Now, if you remember before, I mentioned that the amphitheater of Philip's school didn't even have a roof, so performing in colder weather wasn't very practical. Well, scratch that, because in 1778 through 1779, he had a roof installed on his amphitheater so that he may perform during the colder seasons, and even at night. In 1779, he renamed his school to Astley's Amphitheater Riding House. It was back to business as usual for Philip and his performers. However, he no longer performed himself, as he had retired at the age of 38 and simply became a director, which would be considered a ringmaster by today's standards. In 1778, a familiar face would arrive. That's right, it was Charles Hudges, making his surprise return to London. This time, he came with a secret weapon. Paired with a famous songwriter and librettist named Charles Dibdin, the Charleses would have an amphitheater built with the help of landowners that leased them land. This theater would be built with stone, as opposed to the one that Philip has, which was made from wood. And to no one's surprise, Charles had his amphitheater built not too far away from Philips's yet again. And this time, the amphitheater was legal. He named it the Royal Circus, Equestrian, and Philharmonic Academy, although that was later changed to Hudges' Royal Circus. Can't imagine why. Definitely not because the name was way too long. In 1782, it was finally open and would be the first modern amphitheater to have circus in its title, meaning he even beat Philip to the punch on that one. To say Charles's circus was nice would be an understatement. His circus was so elegant and grand that it would be the standard for all circuses throughout the 19th century. Meanwhile, in 1794, Philips's amphitheater caught on fire. I guess wood wasn't the best material to use after all. But luckily for Philip, he had plenty of resources to have it repaired. With how successful Charles's circus was, Philip lost the monopoly he once had on being the main source of circus acts in London. Unfortunately for the Charleses, they weren't exactly good at handling money or paying taxes. And considering how dysfunctional the relationship between the shareholders and the landowners and even themselves were, the circus would fall apart behind the scenes. By the end of 1797, Charles Hudges would pass away and the land reclaimed, only to be leased again by successors that tried to revive Charles Hudges' legacy. However, they would be plagued by the same issues that caused Charles to lose his circus in the first place. The amphitheater would also fall to bankruptcy, leaving the place in disrepair, and was caught on fire with little money to repair it. After years of renovation, in 1810, Charles's former amphitheater was repaired and turned into a regular theater. And just to be clear, an amphitheater is a 360-degree view of an entire play, whilst a regular theater only has a 180-degree view. Charles Hudges' circus was now a shell of its former self, leaving Philip to reclaim his monopoly on the circus. With the success that his amphitheater brought, Philip realized it was a good time to expand. Remember how I mentioned he had a second home in Paris? Well, it turns out opening a horse riding school in Paris was his new objective. In 1782, returning to his roots, he made a roofless enclosure on the Boulevard du Temple in Paris. John Astley, his son, had become a very skilled performer under the teachings of Philip and would bring great success to their Paris horse riding school. So much so that he was ordered to perform for Queen Marie Antoinette. The performance was received so well that the father and son duo were given the royal privilege to permanently open an amphitheater in Paris. Now the pair would own 2 amphitheaters. Philip knew he could expand his reach even further and would set his eyes on acquiring another royal patent for yet another amphitheater, this time in Dublin, Ireland, which successfully opened in 1789. This on top of the fact that he was still touring around the United Kingdom. In 1803, whilst in Paris, his London amphitheater burned down yet again. Now, you'd think having all your hopes and dreams burned once would be enough to break a man. Having it burned down for a second time, well, you could pretty much tell what happened next. Hey, wait a minute. That didn't happen. Theaters catching on fire was quite common during this time period, especially since many of them were made using wood. So it's not surprising that Phillips's amphitheater burned down several times, not to mention many of the props and decor that they used for performances were very flammable. This also included the use of fireworks in their performances. Luckily for Philip, he was financially stable enough to have it rebuilt yet again, this time in the style of his former rival, Charles Hodges' circus. With Philip Astley's name being well known and being both a skilled businessman and a director, he was commissioned to go back to London and entertain King George III with a firework display on his birthday. With the display being a success, he was given the royal privilege yet again to open another circus in London. It was quickly built and opened in 1806 and named the Olympic Pavilion. Despite being bigger and grander than ever, the new installment would not be as successful as any of the amphitheaters that Philip has had built in the past, leading to a large sum of money being lost and the amphitheater being sold off in 1813. But the number of successful endeavors Philip had undergone greatly overrode the number of failures. Philip had accomplished a great number of achievements, leaving a long-lasting legacy, but all good things must come to an end. As by the year 1814, Philip would die at the age of 72 from stomach ailments on October 20th, leaving everything he's ever owned to his son, John Astley. Today, a statue of him resides in the Newcastle-under-Lyme College's Performing Arts Center as a reminder of the man that would shape the circus that we all know of today. Perhaps the next time you go to the circus, you could remember a man by the name of Philip Astley. Oh yeah, and his original amphitheater would burn down again in 1841.